Welcome to Knife Thoughts. This video is going to be on this knife, and this is the RoseCraft Blades Savage Creek Gunstock Jack in genuine stag. So this is a gunstock pattern from RoseCraft Blades, and it is in genuine stag, and that's a really exciting thing, especially something that we don't see a whole lot, even from companies that are making traditional knives in America. It seems like it's hard to get stag for them. So I was excited when I saw that RoseCraft Blades was coming out with this version of the Savage Creek. There are other versions in this genuine stag. And so this is actual stag. I'm not trying to harp on the point, but a lot of times you see things like bone stag and kind of just imitations of stag. This is not that. It is actual red deer stag. So it is the antlers of a red deer. And it is really cool. So first of all, as you can see, it's relatively thick. You're getting a pretty good slab of stag on each side, but then it's fitted well to the bolster. So it is, hafted to meet with the bolsters. And there's a lot of character in these. I've seen, a good number of these online, and I've seen pretty much all good ones and no bad ones. So mine, has some nice kind of topography, you might say, to it. Not really popcorn, not really groovy, but somewhere in between. It's not super gnarly or anything like that, but it has a great look. I think that it is kind of classic looking stag. These do not have a shield, which GEC has moved away from using shields on their stag knives, and a lot of people are, really kind of up in arms over it. I personally like it, and I agree with Bill Howard. I don't know if this is Andy of RoseCraft Blades, Andy Armstrong's thoughts also, but what Bill has said is that he thinks if you're gonna get this genuine stag, you might as well let it be the focus and not cut a big hole in it for a shield. And I think that that's true. And again, I don't know if that's the idea behind this not having a shield, but I appreciate it that it doesn't have a shield. It just makes it look, to me, simpler, a little bit more classic, and especially with this being a very classic gunstock pattern. So a gunstock, if you're familiar with guns, this is the shape of a traditional gunstock, the stock of a gun, particularly a rifle. And it's a classic pattern. It's a pattern that's been around for over 100 years, and is one that a lot of people like. I do also particularly like the gunstock. It's not my favorite pattern. The Barlow is probably my favorite pattern, but it's one that I do appreciate. And so I have a couple gunstocks that I wanted to give you some comparisons to here. The Great Eastern Cutlery, they actually have a couple different gunstocks, but this is the quintessential gunstock from Great Eastern Cutlery. This is the 44 Buffalo Jack, something like that. So you can see that. And then here is the Jack Wolf Knives gunstock jack. Or no, not gunstock jack, sharpshooter jack. There's sharpshooter and gunslinger. That's why I was getting confused. So you can see that the Savage Creek is kind of between the two. It's something I've noticed actually with some of RoseCraft Blades' other knives, is that they kind of are in a real good middle ground. Not really a small traditional knife, but not really a large traditional knife. Kind of towards the large end, but still in a very pocketable, carryable, reasonable size. So that's just a quick comparison of size with a couple other gunstocks. And you can see that they all share basically the same shape in the handle, but on the Savage Creek, it's a little bit less emphasized, this kind of turn here, than on either of them, especially than on the sharpshooter. That's one of the things with Jack Wolf knives. Benjamin Belkin kind of really ramps up the designs, takes the traditional designs and ramps them up. And that's something that I thought was interesting about this Savage Creek. Also, it's mentioned on RoseCraft Blades' site that this is inspired by an old non-Excel pattern. So they're, I really appreciate their willingness to take these older designs, these vintage patterns and designs, and kind of, I don't know, not necessarily update in the same way that maybe Jack Wolf Knives does, but just kind of make them their own, adjust them somewhat, and bring them to the market here on this really interesting take on a modern slip joint. And I say that because really, there are some things that are modern about this, but it looks super traditional. So if you looked at this knife, if somebody 50, maybe even 100 years ago looked at this knife, particularly from this side where the tang is stamped rather than etched on this side, I don't know that they would be able to tell that this is any different than any knife they would have. It has its classic pin construction. There's no screws. The pins are flush, which I do prefer. It has, classic stag handles, a classic bolster, a classic clip point blade. It just looks like a vintage traditional knife. But then you have some updates. So first of all, it has a stop pin. I really appreciate that they do that. It does give it a little bit of a different sound on close than something without a stop pin. So without a stop pin, it sounds a little bit, more like a traditional knife, a traditionally built knife. It's a little bit more muted in a way, maybe. But it also makes it so that you don't have blade wrap. And seems like if somebody knows anything about my channel, they know that I don't like blade wrap or proud tips. And so these, because of that stop pin, should not have blade wrap. And they do a good job of making sure that the tip sits well within the frame also. You're not going to have a proud tip on this. So I do appreciate that. And then another modern thing that they have is the D2 steel. Now, D2 steel has actually been around for a while at this point, but it is basically not 1095. So, Case uses CV, which is pretty much 1095, and GEC uses 1095, and Baron Sun use it a lot of the times and stuff like that. I appreciate that they're using D2 steel because it is technically a non-stainless steel. So if you really prefer to have a carbon steel, you can still have that, but it is not going to rust or patina anywhere as quickly as 1095. But it's also not going to be as much of a challenge to sharpen as something like S90V. Now, I actually don't find the S90V to be that much of a problem, but I know some people do, and the D2 should be, comparatively easier to sharpen. So I like that they're using D2 also. Now, as for the construction of the knife, I have been really impressed by the construction of these RoseCraft blades. They are just really nicely made, and it's interesting. They honestly, I haven't gotten a lot of case knives in the last several years just because every time I have, it hasn't been a great experience with the quality, but they seem to be of a better quality than Case. And it's, I wish that Case was putting out, higher quality knives. That there is a little bit of a weird Case craze going on with some of their recent cover options that I haven't quite completely understood. So hopefully that induces Case to up their quality. But these RoseCraft blades are, really kind of up there with some of the other people. It's very different than something like a GEC, but it's very similar too. Like I say, traditional construction in how you see it, in how you look at it generally, very traditional styling. The blade finish is very different than a GEC. It's kind of smoother. I don't even really know how to say it. It's maybe polished a little bit more like Case knives are, but the quality is really there. They are always tight. I haven't had any that had blade play. They always have nice action. This one has really nice action. I would call this maybe like a 6, something like that on the pull. Really nice sound to it too, even with that stop pin. Well centered. Just a really nicely made knife. No gaps, as you can see. Nice fitment between the bolsters and the covers. Just a super well made knife, and that has been the case for all of these RoseCraft blade knives that I've seen. Now, one thing with this knife, or two things I guess I did want to mention, is that the blade sits pretty deep into the handle, so it's maybe pinchable for me, but it's kind of difficult. I think generally you're going to use this nail nick. The good thing is the nail nick has a nice solid ledge on it for you to get a good purchase with your thumbnail. So it's not really an issue, but I just generally prefer knives to be pinchable if possible. But a lot of times they're not going to be. So that is one thing. It's not as pinchable for me as some of the other RoseCraft blades knives. And then the other thing is that the blade does not really take all of the handle. And I'm not sure, if there's a design reason for that. Maybe it's something with, making sure that the edge is not hitting this kind of back spring extension here. But maybe it's just a design thing based on the non-Excel that this is, inspired by. But either way, you could probably get, I don't know, again, depending on if it's feasible with the design, another 1/4 inch or something like that out of the blade well of blade. So, that's just something I wanted to mention that I did notice with this knife. But it does have a nice blade. You can see it's a kind of a slender clip point. So like some of RoseCraft blades, other knives, the clip points tend to be kind of just a straight spine, then a straight clip. It's the same deal here on the Savage Creek, but if you compare the Loosahatchee and the Savage Creek, you can see that the Savage Creek is a much more slender blade. And that is also true in comparison to these other Gunstock jacks. So again, there is the Sharpshooter, which is a good bit taller. Here is the Buffalo Jack. Again, I'm not 100% sure. I think that's what it's called. It's not a whole lot taller, and also I did actually sharpen this one a lot. So it's less tall than it was originally. But there are traditional kind of vintage Gunstock jacks that have that more slender blade. So it's not like it's something that's unusual. And I think overall it's a really good looking knife. I have no complaints about the look of it. I think that this Genuine Stag is really great looking. It's a very traditional, classic looking Gunstock, and a really nice knife. I think that they're doing a great job of these. I want to give you some size comparisons to some other RoseCraft blade knives. Here is the Beaver Creek. Speaking of which, these are a lot of river names. So the Beaver Creek, and then the Loosahatchee, and I could not find much information about Savage Creek in Tennessee. They seem to all be in Tennessee there. Seems like it's a small tributary type stream, so I don't know if there's a personal connection with Andy Armstrong. Seems like it's the type of stream that maybe could be a little like brook trout fishing stream. I don't know, but I was looking at it and didn't find a whole lot of information. But there is the Nolichucky and the Beaver Creek for some size comparisons. And again, just a nice knife. Really cool to see that very traditional, classic looking stag on a classic looking Gunstock. So I have appreciated getting to check this out. If you decide to get one of these, make sure you get it at Traditional Pocket Knives, where you can use my link and discount code in the description, or from RoseCraft Blades. And I want to thank both Andy and Austin for kind of making this happen, allowing me to check these out. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, leave any comments below, subscribe to the channel, click the bell and select all so you know when I post new videos. Check out my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife related topics. And make sure you subscribe via email. That's the best way to get all of my content. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.